Welcome to the Hedgehog Watchdog. I am your host, Devin Saxon, joined always by Greg Baldwin. We're the meme team behind Libertarian Party of South Dakota and South Dakotans Against Prohibition. Today's episode is sponsored by pinkcoin.com, Camp Bridger Seasonings. You can check them out at campbridger.net, and the Dakota Rustler. Our guests today are Roger Roots and Curtis Temple. We're trying to get Curtis Temple on the phone still, but Roger Roots is an attorney from Montana, and he's here to talk to us about a case in Pine Ridge, South Dakota, where a rancher is having his cattle seized by the federal government in a very similar situation to Bundy Ranch. How you doing this evening, Roger? And
I'm doing great.
How about you introduce yourself and give us a little bit of background on who you are and what's going on in Pine Ridge?
All right. Well, my name is Roger Roots. I am an attorney. I'm actually a libertarian activist myself, longtime libertarian activist, and I do all kinds of things. And I'm in Montana generally, where I'm born and raised, but I travel around and I worked on the Bundy case myself. I actually was an attorney for the Cliven Bundy team in Nevada and the Ryan Bundy team in Oregon during about 4 years of litigation. And I'm proud to say we beat the federal government pretty badly in that case. I should say those cases. I do a lot of legal research behind the scenes in cases. Anyway, I worked in South Dakota for the case of this guy, Curtis Temple. Now, Curtis is I'm still waiting. He's not just a client of mine, he's a friend of mine. And he lives on the Pine Ridge Reservation. I've called him twice. Anyway, I called him a couple hours ago, and I told him, to be ready. But anyway, he may not be in cell service or in a place with good cell service or good Wi-Fi. So we'll wait for him to see if he comes on. And while he's not on, I'll just summarize the situation a little bit. Basically, Curtis, just to give you the broad background, he is an Ogallala Sioux tribal native. He's a fourth generation rancher there. Actually, he and his family have one of the largest ranches in, you could say, western South Dakota. A lot of it is grazing rights on the reservation. And if any of you know the situation in those reservations, the land situation is very strange. It's almost so convoluted and complicated that it's hard to even describe to people who are not aware of it. Not to go deep into the tribal history, but there was a time when decades and generations ago when a lot of the natives started inheriting the land, and then a lot of them sold their parcels of land on the reservation. And then what has happened is this land has gotten parceled out. And so if you look at the title to some of these allotments inside the Pine Ridge Reservation, and I assume it's the same in the Rosebud Reservation and Standing Rock and elsewhere, you can have 600 owners all named individually as plat owners, and they may not even live on the reservation. Some of them might have moved years ago to California or Texas or wherever. And then you have sections of the reservation that are grazing land that are owned by the tribe itself. On the Pine Ridge Reservation, the Ogallala Sioux tribe owns large sections of pastures. And by the way, this is the most bizarre thing that I think I've ever heard of. The Rosebud Reservation will own parcels within the Ogallala, the Pine Ridge Reservation, and so you have different reservations in the United States that will own pastures there. And then, making it even more complicated, individual ranchers like Curtis Temple will own sections outright themselves, and it's all sort of wormed together. Making it even more complicated is there are certain pastures where a rancher applies every 5 years to get a permit to graze cattle. So, and and by the way, these are prestigious, primo grass pastures if you're into ranching. Really thick grass. I mean, just great grass for grazing cows. A lot of people don't even know that about the Pine Ridge Reservation, but it's got good grass on it. Anyway, those you could say parcels or allotments are supposed to have priority for the natives. In other words, outsiders like a regular white rancher, let's say in Rapid City, can also bid on those if no one else bids. But there's supposed to be a priority to the actual authentic natives there. So Curtis Temple is an authentic, Pine Ridge, Oglala Sioux, and his tribal heritage goes back all the way. And he therefore qualifies for the highest prestige, the highest, I guess, what would it be, priority in terms of making bids on these allotments. So he's always had these particular pastures that have been in his family, and each 5 years he bids. And because he is the highest priority of qualifications, he should be able to meet the highest bid and always get it because he is he's an actual stakeholder in the reservation. All right. Well, what has happened is there's corruption that has gone on behind the scenes, and whether it be the Bureau of Indian Affairs or particular elements of the tribe, I should say the tribal officers. I'm not sure how many members there are, but there's the tribal, the chief, and then there's 12 members of the tribal council. They let's say there's politics and dirty politics involved, and maybe they were jealous. Curtis is actually one of the largest ranchers on the reservation, so he's generated over the years a lot of wealth for a lot of people. He's employed a lot of people. Also, he's generated some jealousy from those on the reservation that may or may not like the guy. By the way, it's fascinating. Tribal politics are pretty vicious everywhere, but on that reservation in particular, going back to the Wounded Knee 2 episode in 1972, you see those divisions. Anyone who lives on that reservation in Pine Ridge or Wounded Knee knows that there's vicious tribal politics there. So Curtis has been, let's say, he's been cheated out of his allotments back in 2013. So what has he done? He's hired lawyers. He spent tens of thousands of dollars on attorneys, including myself, but not just myself. I'm an outsider. I came in really in his case to work on his criminal case, which thankfully we got dismissed, but there's still a lot of civil litigation going on. Curtis has continued to graze his cows on those allotments where the Bureau of Indian Affairs claims he didn't qualify because there was a rival family that claimed that they came in. Let's just say there was some corruption. They came in and they took his grazing rights from him, and he's had this ongoing battle since 2013. 8 years. This is ongoing for 8 years. So he's continued to have his cows out there. There have been, I wish he was here because at least 7 or 8 or 9 different times the federal government has come in with trucks and impounded his cows, and they often wait. They spy on him. They actually have spies on the reservation, and they wait to see if he goes to town, to Rapid City, which is about 80 miles away, or if they spy on him and they watch where he is, and then they'll go and round up his cows at distant locations. And again, this for anyone who knows that reservation range area, it's vast. So he might have 50 head of cows that are 12 miles away on a little parcel, and another 75 head of cows that are 2 miles away the other direction, and they actually they spy on him, and they've done every trick in the book. I came in to help him because he was actually federally indicted back in about 2000, I think 16 or 17, 2017, I believe. He was actually indicted by the federal DOJ for crimes that he clearly did not commit. He was actually accused of depredation of federal property over $1,000 value just for grazing cows on these grazing allotments. Okay. There were several defenses. Number one, they didn't harm one grass. The grass is so deep and thick there. They didn't harm any grass. They didn't cause any harm to anything. But even worse, The federal government does not own that land. Okay, and this is
Yeah.
very important. This is how we got it dismissed. The federal government is actually technically just a trustee of certain lands in the reservation. Nothing but a trustee. So they couldn't even legitimately say that anyone damaged the property of the United States. Anyway, we got that. He was looking at up to 5 years in federal prison. We got the whole thing dismissed in about 2018, but they've continued to come after him, claiming that he owes money because, again, he's in a long court battle. And he's contending, we are contending he doesn't owe a dime. Actually, they owe him technically. But they claim he owes something like, several $100,000 of back grazing fees that he hasn't paid. Remember, he doesn't owe anything because he actually has a right to graze his cows where they are. Anyway, it's a long ongoing battle, and they keep impounding and seizing his cows, and it really has harmed his ranch, really diminished the number and the head of cows that he has. And so he's fighting them down to the last cow, and I have no idea exactly how many cows he has, but it's several hundred head. But they've taken hundreds from him.
Wow. So
Yeah.
what can South Dakotans do to help Mr. Curtis Temple? Is it basically just a matter of spreading the message and letting people know what's going on? Because this is like out in the middle of nowhere, so people don't really I don't know much of what's going on Pine Ridge at any given time. So
yeah, that's the real question: is what can be done. Curtis has spent lots of money on lawyers, and he's in court right now, and it's sort of funny because there's a tribal court system. He's active in the tribal court system. A lot of people don't realize the tribal courts are not normal courts from our perspective. So a lawyer who is licensed or who is familiar and trained with the laws in, let's say, federal court or state court really doesn't know much of anything about how to fight a case in tribal court. Totally different sort of common law structure there. And a lot of people don't know, in terms of criminal cases, misdemeanors, what we would call misdemeanors, like whatever, shoplifting or speeding or car, traffic violations, are on the reservation. They are the jurisdiction of tribal court. Felonies are the jurisdiction. This is very strange, of federal court, federal jurisdiction. So there is no state jurisdiction at all. Like, you could commit a murder on the Pine Ridge Reservation, and the state of South Dakota courts would have no jurisdiction. It would be only federal. And that actually is the reason that the federal prisons are filled with a very high proportion of Native Americans, because every single felony on reservation land is a federal crime, not a state crime. So if anyone commits a felony normally in South Dakota, you'd be in state court, but Native Americans are in federal court all the time.
Yeah, the worst part about the federal, like in my opinion, and I'm not a native and I don't live there, but in my opinion, you'd almost rather go to state court than federal court, because the federal court system has like a 90+% conviction rate, and you also do 85% of your time. So if they give you 10 years, you're doing 8 of that 10 or whatever. Whereas state court's a little more lenient, I think. But yeah, they give them a lot of time by going through the federal court system for sure.
Yeah, federal court, in terms of criminal cases, federal cases are much more severe. The sentences are much longer generally. And let's face it, the federal DOJ has so much more money than the state DOJ everywhere. And so they've got endless resources. So, and obviously if I would just say a typical, a gun case or something, you're much rather fight it in the state court, because if you fight hard, you can win in state court. If you fight hard in federal court, That just means that they'll add a couple more U.S. attorneys to take you on. I mean, they have endless resources.
Yeah. And I kind of know a little bit about like what you were talking about, how Pine Ridge is kind of divided a little bit. I had a friend for years that was originally from there, and he would try to tell me all about that. And he said there was a really bad problem with nepotism there. So you had people that would come to power, and they would just put all their families in power, and the BIA, especially, basically the lapdogs of the federal government, and it's kind of crazy. But yeah, he would tell me all about that stuff, that it was really bad there. And then another thing, corruption, like you said, corruption. There's with government. There's with the federal government handing out a lot of money all the time. You know, there tends to be a lot of embezzlements and things like that. Not to get off subject, but it is definitely different.
I think that's right on subject. You know, a lot of people don't, you know, from a libertarian perspective, there are several angles to this. Okay, on the reservation, you know, there's free college for anyone who wants it. There's free health care. So all these things that we hear socialists declare to be their big agenda items for all of us, they've already achieved them they've already got it on the reservations. And what is the result? It's obvious. It's visible to anyone. It's a terrible outcome, because even though they have free college and they have all kinds of benefits, actually they get, you know, we've heard of universal basic income, the idea of just everyone gets some support no matter what they do. I think they pretty much got that on most of the reservations, or a version of that. And what is the outcome? You can see it with your own eyes if you drive in. I live in Montana, where we have the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, we have the Crow Reservation, the Blackfeet Reservation, where you can see the poverty and the hopelessness right in front of your eyes. I mean, the streets with no sidewalks, dirt streets, the whole thing, you know. And even though they have all these government benefits that the people, you know, for the rest of us who are not on the reservation, the people who call themselves liberals want to, you know, give us these wonderful blessings, free healthcare, free college, and all these UBI, universal basic income ideas, as if that'd be a great benefit. Well, you can observe the outcome of that just by going on the Pine Ridge Reservation, which I believe is the poorest county in the United States. I think it's the poorest county in the United States there.
Yeah, a couple years ago, they have the free healthcare, like you say, in Indian Health Services. But like a couple years ago, you know, you mentioned Rosebud. They actually shut down their emergency room for like a year or something like that, just because the poor quality of care. And I think it really highlights the fact that you just can't throw money at a problem and think that the problems are going to be solved. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm not an expert on IHS. I mean, maybe it's underfunded, as they always claim, but yeah, the quality of care is definitely not there.
Mr. CJ Abernathy says, "What up, Hedgehog Watchdog Warriors? Always remember 100% of the problems with the federal government can be solved by abolishing the federal government." Yeah, I agree with that. So, do you know how long Curtis's family has been ranching on Pine Ridge? I think I just mentioned it at Freedom Fest. I think it was over a century.
I believe so. I believe he's fourth generation rancher. Mm-hmm. So, you know, and actually his grandfather and his father built up the ranch. So that it by acres, I think it is one of the larger ranches in that area. It's tens of thousands of acres. Mm-hmm. Not sure exactly, but it's a very large ranch. So, but it's sprawling, and that actually, even though that sounds great, it creates problems for Curtis because it's so vast, and he might have cows that are in a pasture that's 12 miles away, and the government just is able. Again, they spy on him. They actually have a system of spying, and they will seize all of his cows in a distant location that he's not able to watch. And I guess he probably needs some help with maybe getting some system of notifications. But he certainly doesn't have he doesn't have the labor to have them at all those remote posts and watch everything. But eventually, it might come down to the the militia of I don't know if there is a militia in that area. Even by the way, you mentioned the Bundys. The Bundys are from they know about the situation, and they who knows what. Maybe someday it'll be a big standoff. I think Curtis would practically Curtis has done everything he can to avoid anything like that, but. I don't know. It almost seems inevitable because they keep flouting the law. And again, he has lawyers who are in court, but these court cases just go on, and there's never a ruling. And while the case is pending, the tribe just comes and steals another 100 head of cattle. And so he's down to just a few hundred head, I believe.
Mr. Chris German says, what do they do with his cows? Do you know what they do with his cows when they steal?
Well,
do they auction them off or?
Well, yes, they. It's sort of funny because they do different things at different times. Ironically, the first big impound was back in about 2015, and they actually trucked his cows over the border to Nebraska, and they were going to auction them off, but there was such a protest, even among the ranchers. No rancher wants to buy stolen cows. And so once word gets out that an auction yard is about to sell a bunch of stolen cows, well, that creates a lot of hubbub. And I believe they abandoned the first idea to auction them all off, and they were keeping them in a pen in, I think it might have been Crawford, Nebraska, somewhere in Nebraska. And they pulled a dirty trick on Curtis and claimed that one of his bull had tested positive for trichinosis or some something. Anyways, it's not even clear if that was true. It looked like it was a manufactured claim, and they may have even planted that bull in the corral solely to create that claim and also maybe defame his cattle to some extent. I believe that's part of a legal claim that he has now, is that they were trying to disparage his cows. And of course, one effect when word gets out that a rancher has diseased cows, guess what that does to the price at auction?
Yeah.
The price plummets. So basically, they're stealing from him and they're defaming the value of the cows, and so they go for $5 or whatever. And a couple times Curtis has, let's just say, gone and paid the ransom and got the cows back a couple times. He has different lawyers who give him different advice, and I might disagree with some of the other lawyers. Some of us give him advice not to retrieve the cows, but sue over it. The problem is the courts are so slow to move on that.
Yeah.
And some of the other lawyers give him the advice to go and pay the ransom, which is cheaper than, let's say, rebuilding his herd from scratch on the market. And so he's had to do that a couple times just to stay in the business, ironically. And I can't even tell you the economic damage that has happened to him, but it's substantial. So I don't know if that answered that question. He gets notices in the mail. He just got another notice that they're claiming that, again, he's in defiance. So he has cows sometimes that are in a place where they tell him he's not supposed to have cows. So they're claiming he owes whatever, $200,000 or something preposterous. So he gets certified letters in the mail and where the Bureau of Indian Affairs says we're going to come and seize more of your cows. So he has those pending right now, several. He's got 2 letters, and they could come at any time and seize more of his cows. He's really in a battle. And the law in this area, let's put it this way, I believe Curtis could ultimately win in court and win everything and lots of back pay. He could also lose. And it all depends on the outcome, how a judge perceives a particular situation. That I believe all of South Dakota, but I could be wrong. At least the western half of South Dakota is a fence out. They call it fence out jurisdiction. So if you want to keep cattle off your land, it is your obligation legally to fence them out. Whereas in more urban places, if you want, it's your obligation to fence them in. And legally speaking, that's a big difference. And so remember, Curtis owns outright. There might be a parcel of ground that's, let's just say, hypothetically, that's 500 acres of land. Okay. And in that 500 acres of land, there might be parcels that are owned outright by Curtis. He might own 20 acres, a square of 20 acres, and he is under no obligation whatsoever to fence that 20-acre parcel. And he has every right in the world, we argue he has every right in the world to keep his cows on that 20-acre square that is within the 500 acres that the tribal pasture contains. Okay. They say otherwise. The Bureau of Indian Affairs say otherwise. So these are legal disputes that have to ultimately be resolved by a federal judge. I would argue that if you own outright a 20-acre parcel that is not fenced, but is within a 500-acre parcel owned by the Pine Ridge Reservation, for example, I would argue that you have an absolute right to put your cows on that 20 acres, and you are under no obligation to fence it. Again, a federal judge might disagree with us ultimately. This is in federal court. A lot of these questions could be resolved in either direction.
Yeah, I suppose the law could be different for the tribe than like what you were mentioning, the state law. I don't think that's an East River thing. I think that might just be West River because it's more rural out there as far as the fence thing. Because, yeah, you get over here and they were replacing some road, doing some shoulder work on a highway right by me. And it's like the state's putting up fence all along the highway. But I've heard that before from people out West River that you don't have to fence your cattle. One of our ranching buddies, people will complain because they'll be driving through the area and speeding, and they've actually hit cows, but it's technically your responsibility to be watching for that and not damaging the property, basically.
Exactly. In western South Dakota, it is your obligation as a driver to watch out for cows, and it's open range. There's no obligation for the cow owner to fence them out. It's your obligation to watch out for them, and that may not be true in other parts.
So it sounds like go ahead.
I was going to say another oddity about ranching in South Dakota, and I know this is true in Nebraska also, is that there's branding areas and non-brand areas. So I believe in eastern South Dakota, the cattle there are more, I believe the ground is generally more fertile there. And so there isn't as much cattle ranching. It's more farming, which is more lucrative per acre. And so my understanding is you don't have to have your cattle branded. Whereas in the western parts, I know this is true in Nebraska, the ground is not as fertile, and so there's more of a culture of branding the cows, because you might have a cow that, a cow can only survive if there's 2 cows per 50 acres or whatever, and so they're much more spread out and sparse. And so I guess what I'm trying to say here is that there are a lot of oddities about ranching in in the Dakotas that a lot of people who don't do it aren't familiar with. But in some sections of the state, you are subject to the brand policy, and that means you need a brand inspector anytime you ship or sell cows across a state line or a boundary, or anytime you sell them. So then but that it might not be true in eastern South Dakota.
So it sounds like Curtis, like before all this went down, he was bringing a lot of wealth and jobs into the Pine Ridge Reservation. Do you think the federal government, might be conspiring to mess with him to bring the reservation down in a way? Because you mentioned it's like the poorest county in the country, and the federal government does have a history of sowing division within local communities to stop them from or hinder them from succeeding and keeping them poor. Do you think that might be something like going on with this case?
Wow, that's a great question. There's so many things going on. I don't know. I learned this myself in this case. There has been this 20-year idea of creating a national park in addition to the Badlands National Park, which of course is sort of interwoven with that reservation. But there's been a movement, and there's a lot of money has changed hands, and there have been let's just say some people want to create something called I think it's called the Sioux. They're going to create a Sioux tribal national park. Tribal Badlands, or maybe the Ogle Island. Anyway, it'll be like a national park, but with part of basically much of the reservation will be a national park adjacent to the Badlands National Park. Okay, this is an idea that has come up and it's gone to votes before the tribal council, and I believe
Who's pushing that idea? Is that tribal members?
Well, let's put it this way.
You would think it wouldn't be.
It's sort of funny. There's some who are behind it, some who are not. Curtis is not. Okay. Yeah. There are some who think it would bring lots of tourism to the Pine Ridge Reservation. Now, this is a strange, I don't know. Honestly, I can't tell you what I would think would be the best outcome. Would it be great to have Pine Ridge, South Dakota, with lots of water parks and Hyatt Regency resort hotels? And, I don't know, honestly. You can find some who support that idea and some who resist it. Bottom line is Curtis's pastures tend to be smack dab in you could call it ground zero, the target area of this potential proposed national park. So that Devin asked the question, well, do you think something might be going on where the insidious forces of the federal government are plotting in some way to, it's possible that there's a long-term plot to remove all ranching from there, including Curtis's ranching operation, to create this national park. And there may well have been payoffs and bribes. Curtis can tell you about that kind of thing. A lot of it is sort of whispered. Nobody wants to talk about it on the reservation. But I believe there's a lot of money that has changed hands. There have been people who've bought property there with the intention that it will become not a cattle ranch, but bison. They'll have more bison, which will attract the tourists. The tourists want to see natives chasing bison with loincloths and spears. I mean, they joke around about, are they going to try to create a Wild West zoo or something? So you can find different opinions about these ideas. And again, I can only say that it's possible that there is a deep, long-term agenda of eliminating cattle ranching completely and replacing it with this national park idea, and or maybe bison. And anyway, I could only speculate, and I'm an outsider. I don't live there, and I don't know.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me.
Though.
It kind of reminds me of Bundy Ranch, where wasn't that like the Chinese were buying up land out there? Is that one of the reasons why the federal government wanted to get them off their land? I think it was to build like some sort of plant of some sort, like I don't know forgot what kind of plant it was, but
Well, let's put it this way. That part of Nevada is very dry and it's desert. And so there have been proposals there's solar park proposals, but there's also lithium. There's mineral rights there. I'm talking about the Bundy Ranch area, which is north of Las Vegas, Nevada, maybe 100 miles north of Las Vegas. I guess we're all familiar with those claims, and some people claim that U.S. Senator Harry Reid, who was from Nevada, actually had a stake behind the scenes in removing all the cattle from that area and creating you mentioned the Chinese, that he had agreements with the Chinese to put in some lithium or mineral mining operations there. Some of that came up in the criminal case tangentially, I guess.
Yeah, I thought it was funny how after that Bundy Ranch situation went down, how it did with the BLM like scurrying out of there. Like a couple weeks later, Harry Reid had like black eyes, and his excuse was that he fell or something, or he had an accident with exercising equipment or something. But it's very suspicious to me. It kind of seemed like a mafia beat him up of some sort. I don't know which mafia from which country or what was going on, but I don't know. It seemed really suspicious, the timing of it all.
It's let's put it this way. I know Cliven and Ammon. It's funny, the libertarian Ammon, the Bundy family is a large family, very Mormon, very LDS. I forget exactly how many brothers and sisters there are there, but there's Ammon Bundy, Ryan Bundy, Cliven Bundy. They're the most libertarian of the. Some of them are just more patriot / Republican in their. They're not all monolithic, but Ammon Bundy is a great libertarian thinker. And where am I going with this?
Which one's running for governor in Idaho now?
That is Ammon Bundy. Now he's running as a Republican, I believe. But again, he's very libertarian. If you ask him on most topics, I could probably think of some where he might not be, but he's probably more libertarian than any libertarian presidential candidate that the Libertarian Party has ever had, in many ways. And I love Ammon, and he's also a great strategist for liberty. In terms of asking the question, well, what can we really do to create a free society? You got to hand it to them. The Bundys are pretty bold, and they do things that no one would ever give them the advice to do, such as the 2016 occupation of the Malheur Wildlife Refuge, where they just literally had a bunch of protesters take over a federal wildlife refuge. It was pretty ballsy. And it's amazing that it sort of worked out for them, not for everyone. A few people pled guilty, but ultimately, most of the criminal defendants were either fully or partially acquitted.
That's what I found out by watching the news. If you're ever going to go against the federal government, it can't just be you. Like, it's got to be a couple hundred people, because they had that shootout with all the bikers in Texas a couple years ago at that Twin Peaks restaurant, and they had charged a couple people had actually died in that, and they had charged like dozens of people. Every single person got acquitted on those charges. It's right. There's definitely strength in numbers,
Didn't it turn out that there were undercover cops that were the ones that were actually doing most of the shooting?
Yeah, I'm not sure all the details on all that.
Honestly, I believe. Let's put it this way: the whole thing was a propaganda. I believe that there was a meeting of bikers at this Twin Peaks restaurant, and the vice squad or the cops just started shooting them as they walked out the door, and then a couple of the bikers were armed and returned fire with a couple rounds, no more. Didn't harm a single cop. The cops, I think, killed, I forget how many, was it 3 or 4 or 5? And then put the bikers on trial for murder. for the murder that the cops had committed.
That's insane. I saw you did a report a year ago. I was at a courthouse. I think it was in Idaho, and one of the Bundys had a court date, but they said that masks were required to enter the courtroom. So he was standing outside the courtroom trying to get in without a mask, and they ended up arresting him for failure to appear in court when he was literally at the courthouse. And there's like a situation where there's a juror trying to get for their trial too, and they didn't want to wear a mask. What do you have an update on what happened with that situation? And what Bundy was that? Was that Ammon Bundy?
That was Ammon Bundy. Ammon Bundy is a great guy, by the way. If you ever meet him, great guy, and he's got a real spirit for freedom too. And from the very beginning of the COVID hysteria, he tagged it immediately as let's just say overreach, and so he held some of the nation's first big meetings, church meetings and whatnot in Idaho. And anyway, bottom line is he was facing court for ironically trespassing at the Idaho State Capitol back in August of last year. And I guess you're talking about an incident that was a few months back. It might have been in about March or April. And I was there with him, and he was going to court, but he refused to submit to the mask requirements. And so the judge inside actually charged him with contempt of court for not being present, for failure to appear, while the judge knew he was right outside the courthouse, and he would not submit to the mask requirement. And he was trying to get in to go to trial. And bottom line is that litigation continued for a few more months, and I think he just went to trial. Finally, he won the right to go to trial with no mask on, but he lost. Now, let me just say, you mentioned the jurors. The jury pool is poisoned fundamentally because it's not an actual cross section of the community, because they won't allow jurors who won't wear masks. Now, let's face it. Ammon Bundy is an activist, and he's a well-known anti-masker. And so the jurors are 100% maskers. They don't let the anti-maskers on the juries. And so let me think. I'm not sure he has that appealed right now, but his co-defendant, Aaron Schmidt, is appealing. I believe Ammon's position. Ammon got so disgusted, he just filed to run for governor instead of appealing it. But he has a co-defendant who is appealing some of those issues right now. So bottom line is, I guess the current status is he was convicted of misdemeanors like trespassing and obstruction, sentenced to time served, and he did not appeal. Aaron Schmidt, his co-defendant, is appealing to the Idaho Supreme Court, while Ammon himself is running for governor of Idaho.
Nice. Well, hopefully he does well there to get back at those bastards messing with him. I get so upset when you hear things like that where they're not, because, as a juror, I'd like to see the facial expressions of a defendant or what's going on. Like, so them wearing a mask is hindering my ability to judge the case.
Absolutely. And I've made that argument since the beginning of this whole thing. Not just the jurors, but all witnesses need to be unmasked. The judge needs to be unmasked. The prosecutor needs to be unmasked. The jurors need to be unmasked, because all of that, you could say, facial expression is communication. And so when you see the judge mocking you or smirking, or the prosecutor smirking, and when the jurors see the prosecutor smirking, or if they notice that the defendant seems to be honest, but the others aren't, that's all part of a traditional trial, the game of trying to find the facts in a trial. And you can't really do it legitimately when different people are wearing masks over their face.
Do you have any more questions, Greg, about for Mr. Roots?
Well, I mean, not about Curtis's situation. I mean, that sounds terrible. I think next time, man, if there's ever any protests that we could help with, or I mean anything like that, don't hesitate to reach out. I'd love to be a part of something like that.
Yeah, we could probably get better interviews in person too, like on the scene somewhere.
Next time they steal his cattle, which I hope they don't again, knock on wood. But if they ever do, yeah, I mean,
or if like the Bundys do get involved with this case ever, and if they hold
we don't
some
need the
sort
Bundys.
of
We got
protest
the
like at the Oregon refuge, that'd be good.
Well, it is. Yeah, listen, I think. Yeah, I mean, let's put it this way: everyone's aware of sort of what's going on, and again, he could actually win the whole thing in court, or he could lose the whole thing in court. But while we're waiting on court outcomes, they just keep harassing him in this way, and so it's just a very strange, awkward situation. And as to how it can turn out, how it will turn out, I haven't the slightest idea. But I do know the Bundys are very aware, and they've talked to him on the phone quite a bit over the situation. And I should say the Bundy family, the Bundy Ranch down in Nevada, their arguments are a little bit different. They're similar, but a little bit different. Remember, their arguments are that they have grandfathered grazing rights on the range that are property rights, and that they actually have property rights that supersede the Bureau of Land Management because they were there before the Bureau of Land Management was there. So their argument really is based on the fact that their ancestors came before there was even a state of Nevada, before there was even a city of Las Vegas. The Bundy family was ranching in that area, and there were acts of Congress back in the 1800s that were sort of like similar to the Homestead Act, the Taylor Grazing Act, and the Ditch Act. There's something called the Ditch Act in the 1870s, I believe, that actually said for the pioneers headed west that it is their property rights to claim water rights and grazing rights, and that those are property rights that can never be taken from them. And so the Bundys, for all these years, have maintained that the grass out there on the range which the federal government now claims to own, which again, you could get into that argument whether or not the federal government owns them or even has the constitutional authority to own such land. Anyway, bottom line is, the Clive and Bundy Ranch down there is the only ranch in the United States that is still resisting this. There have been others who have grazed cows on these lands that are called federal lands, either Forest Service or BLM or whatever, over the years, but they pretty much all folded, or they've been bought out, or one thing or led to another. Lavoy Finicum actually was a rancher in, let me think, it would have been northern Arizona, the Arizona Strip area. And, Lavoy Finicum was also defying the authorities by having cattle out that he was claiming he had a right to graze on the grass, that the federal government was claiming that he had to pay permit fees for. And of course, what happened to Lavoy Finicum? They shot him in the back in the Bundy Malheur Refuge standoff in Oregon. So that eliminated the second rancher in the United States that was making that stand. Right now, the Bundy Ranch is the only one making that stand.
Didn't the federal officer that shot Lavoy, wasn't he being charged for murder? And then that kind of like that story kind of just disappeared. You never heard anything else after that. It's that was a FBI hostage rescue team sniper named Astorita, Joseph Astorita. And he was put on trial not for murder, but for basically obstruction of justice and lying to cover up the fact that he had fired at least 2 rounds during that traffic stop. And then he lied about it and said he hadn't.
And it's very clear that he had, because you look at the film and the audio from every angle, it's very clear that FBI agent Astorita fired at least 2 shots, one of which actually ricocheted into Ryan Bundy's shoulder, and Ryan Bundy still has the bullet in his shoulder to this day, I believe, or at least a piece of shrapnel that was driven, that might have blown off the pickup into his shoulder. In any case, the Deschutes County, Oregon detective was rather heroic in realizing that Joseph Astorita of the FBI had lied. And so they put Astorita on trial for obstruction of justice and lying, and I believe tampering with evidence. And I attended much of the first week. I attended the first week and a little bit of the second week of that trial. And what happened there was his buddies, Joseph Astorita's buddies in the FBI, took the stand, and they basically lied to protect him from conviction. And so his other FBI buddies took the witness stand, and they were asked, well, did you fire those 2 shots? And each one lied and said, oh, I might have. So that led the jury to acquit Astorita. So his FBI buddies totally protected him from conviction.
Yeah, that seems to happen a lot when federal agents are on trial.
Yeah.
Do you have anything, final words or final thoughts you want to say, or anything you want to plug before we sign off for the night?
Well, let's see. I guess Curtis didn't make it. I don't know if we'll have him. Anyway, I'll talk to him. I'm sure I'll talk to him later.
Yeah, we can have him
I do
on,
a lot
like,
of
any
things
Sunday.
myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I also have a podcast on the Free Speech Media Network with Felony Melanie. We call it the weekly podcast against the state. Sometimes we miss weeks, so it's not really weekly. But anyway, I also have a podcast, and that's usually on Fridays. What else am I working on? I'm a libertarian activist myself. I'm actually, I do a thing called Lysander Spooner University, which you can see at lysanderspooneruniversity.com. And we try to have events. We actually have an upcoming event at Glacier National Park in northern Montana, where we're going up in September to take pictures of the glaciers. This will be, I believe, our 6th, maybe a 7th year. Every year we go up at the end of the melt season for the glaciers just to take pictures of the glaciers up there. And we always catch the government lying about the state of the glaciers. You know, the government has claimed these glaciers were all going to be melted by the year 2020 or whatever. And we take pictures and we compare them with past pictures. And anyway, so it's a great project. This year, of course, has been a hot summer, very hot. So it may well be that the glaciers have diminished a bit, but we're going to get pictures. That'll be September 16th and 17th. So look, just follow that on lysanderspooneruniversity.com.
Nice.
And I also have another thing, which I call antigovernmentnews.com. And so I'm trying to develop a news agency called Anti-Government News.
Uh-oh.
Nice. We need more independent media. Because,
sounds like an FBI watch list waiting to happen.
It's just a matter of time before they take me out.
I was actually just talking about this morning, that there was a guy in Iowa who was arrested for, the January. I don't know what he did, but he was part of the January 6th at the Capitol. So he got arrested
Allegedly
after he come back to Iowa. And prosecutor just violated his bond because he watched anti-government videos on YouTube. And
I saw that.
Yeah, that's like, what is going on in this country right now?
I saw that. Yeah,
like,
actually,
I mean, we have a First Amendment right, but it's pretty obvious that there's some big censorship going on in America right now.
Yeah. Oh, it's unbelievable. Unbelievable. And by the way, the judges have, I blame the judges. The courts have completely failed to do their job to protect us from all these COVID restrictions and even the election improprieties. I'll just say that needed to be much more analyzed in court. The judges have totally failed us. And as to the future of this republic, if it lasts, is really in jeopardy.
Yeah. It definitely feels like the beginning of the end of the American idea or experiment. Unless things change drastically, and hopefully the Libertarian Party and libertarians out there can keep spreading the word and slow it down or stop it or reverse it, hopefully, or something.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
very insightful information. We appreciate you coming on and talking to us about the Curtis Temple case. We'll definitely still try to have him on one of these Sundays so we can get some more in-depth details. And yeah, just thanks again for coming on. Always good to talk with Mr. Root. Any final thoughts from you, Greg?
All right. Well, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
We'll see you next year in Reno, maybe.
Yeah.
Right on. Definitely.
Yeah. All right. So.
Well, we didn't get Curtis Martin, but we got the second best thing. So.
Yeah, we'll still try to get him on it. It's really hard to get the ranchers on West. Yeah. The ranchers West River, they have such bad service for internet, cell phones. Yeah. It's hard to get a hold of them.
Broadband for all. We've said it here 1,000 times. 1,000 times. Why are we sending money to Israel when the natives don't even have broadband access in Pine Ridge? Sending $3 billion a year to freaking Israel. You know.
Reminder that Freedom Feast is in 2 weeks. Next Sunday, we've got one campsite available that we can give to somebody if they want it. They might be sold out at the moment, but we still have that one backup site. Do you have anything else to talk about in the news, or should we wait for next week?
Well, next week we're going to have a veteran, my brother, who did a couple tours in Iraq. We're going to get his perspective on the Afghanistan fiasco. I listened to a couple Scott Horton podcasts today in the car on the way home when I was driving around, trying to get some insight into all that. And one thing he kind of brought up was just the media's kind of blowing it out of proportion in the sense that it really kind of was a peaceful transition of power, so to speak. Yeah. It's like, the U.S. did pull out, but very minimal violence at all. But we'll save that for next week. We'll get a veteran's perspective on the Biden fiasco. If any other veterans want to join, let us know.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we'll put an invite link for other veterans. But I heard, I don't know, I guess I heard the opposite of what you heard. I mean, like the first day or first couple of days, you didn't really hear much of the violence from the Taliban. But recently I've been hearing reports that now that they have been looking for journalists and stuff and shooting them. But we'll find out next week. We'll have more details, do some more research on what's going on, and we'll have hopefully some boots on the ground from maybe not Afghanistan, but Iraq is a similar area. I think a similar situation happened in Iraq with ISIS basically taking over a big chunk of Iraq when our troops didn't even actually withdraw from Iraq, did they? Because I feel like we still have troops in Iraq.
So kind of on the podcast, they kind of touched on it, and like I don't know if I would classify that we won Iraq, but Iraq definitely worked out a lot better than Afghanistan did.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm no foreign policy expert on that crap myself. But we were also trying to get a guy to come on in that was going to be the second hour. The first hour, we were going to try to do a medical marijuana and an overall cannabis update in South Dakota. There's been a lot of movement on that issue. The State Department of Health only had till like October or November, I can't remember the exact date, to start issuing medical marijuana cards. So the clock's ticking. Sioux Falls made headlines for coming up with some restrictive bullshit. Biggest city in South Dakota, over 200,000 people, probably 300,000 in the metropolitan area, and they want to restrict dispensaries to five
Yeah, that's
medical
cool.
marijuana dispensaries, which is ridiculous. So we might have a guest on in the first hour kind of giving us an update on all that.
Yeah, that'll be good. Chris Jones says, it is definitely nice we aren't bringing home American body bags like the end of Nam. Yeah, I think that was part of the deal they made with the Taliban was that, you know, if no Americans die for the next year, we'll pull out. And they stopped shooting our soldiers for a year. And then we pulled out, and then they took the country over and stole all the military equipment from the Afghan army. I think CJ, who was in Afghanistan, CJ was in Afghanistan. He's got a lot of insight. I think I won't spoil it here, and we'll save it. Maybe if we can get an he's harvesting right now, so he doesn't have time to come on the podcast, but maybe he'll be at Freedom Feast, and we can get a little interview with him there because he's got a lot of insight and details about the Afghan army and why they didn't even put up a fight. Oh, CJ's watching right now. He says, I'll come again soon. Nice. So, yeah, very excited for the next couple of weeks. We're going to have some big things happening. Also, Freedom Feast. I'm going to say it one more time. If you're not a real libertarian, if you're not at Freedom Feast this year, it's at September 11th at the Palisades Park. It's free. Greg makes free food. Camp there, spend the night. We'll sing libertarian campfire songs. It'll be blast.
Food, drink beer, be merry.
Yeah. Be libertarian. That should be like the slogan of it. Like, come to Freedom Feast. Be libertarian.
We are implementing a vaccine policy this year, though. So make sure you bring your cards. I will be taking cards. No, just kidding. Come out. It's awesome. This is the third year we've done it.
Turbine Guy says they tried doing that in Florida, limiting dispensaries, and they lost at the Supreme Court. No limiting dispensaries in Florida. Well, that sounds like something we need to do in Sioux Falls because, like, Rapid City is talking about having more than 15 dispensaries, and they're like a third the population of Sioux Falls. And Sioux Falls is going to have 5.
Well, one thing I know about the law that the voters passed, so this was actually part of the initiative, was so they left it up to municipalities, local jurisdictions to decide how many. So they kind of wrote that into the law to allow these places to decide that. Kind of like how your local municipalities or whatever decide how many liquor licenses are going to be in town. I mean, maybe that's not typical everywhere, but that's kind of how they do it in South Dakota. But yeah, 5 is pretty restrictive, and yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, that's bull. We're gonna get all into that, and it's a lottery system too, where they're just gonna pick 5 random people, and you have to pay $100,000 to join the lottery. So it's like, come on. So you know that no local South Dakotans are gonna be able to afford this or take the risk on it. It's all gonna be an out-of-state operation. So I'm just not about that. I'd rather local South Dakotans get in on this revenue that's about to come into the state, not people from marijuana. Colorado, not big marijuana.
Big marijuana with all their money. But, I agree. It's pretty much a license to print money. I mean, if you can get in on the ground floor right now, like right now in South Dakota, there's only one place. The Native Americans, the Flandreau Santee Sioux Tribe, they open their doors early in July. So there's only one place that you can get legal medical, but man, if you can get in on the ground floor, it's pretty much a license to print money. You know what I mean? It's yeah.
Money does grow on trees if you're growing weed. Reminder to like our page on Facebook, Hedgehog Watchdog. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter at Hedgehog Watchdog. We're on Spotify now, iTunes. Check our website out at hedgehogwatchdog.com where you can buy some Hedgehog Watchdog merchandise. Help us do some investigative reporting work, travel across the state. Every t-shirt that was bought helped us go to Freedom Fest in Rapid City, and we covered that in extensive detail. I had a lot of people on the show that were speaking at Freedom Fest or even running Freedom Fest.
Hey, Turbine Guy, are you still watching? Come to Freedom Feast. Freedom Feast. It's our annual barbecue. You can check it out on the Libertarian Party of South Dakota's Facebook page. We have an event for it. I don't think you're more than a couple hours away from that event. Yeah, we'll be hanging out, barbecuing all day. Stop out. It's free to attend, although there's a fee, a park entrance fee. But
yeah, the government charges you a fee, but we don't.
Yeah,
but
we don't.
all your libertarian needs will be taken care of at Freedom Feast. You don't have to worry about anything. So it's gonna be a great time. It's our third one. Every time I think the first one we had like 7 people, and then the second one we had 30 people. So if we're on the same track, we're looking at 120 people showing up, Greg. If we
actually, you know what? Don't show up, and then I can save money on meat. Have you seen meat prices?
But yeah, we'll see everybody next Sunday. Greg's brother is going to be on. He's going to talk to us about the Iraq War, his opinions on what's going on in Afghanistan. Should be a good time. And Garrett Baldwin is also one of the chefs at Freedom Feast. Yeah. So we'll talk about Freedom Feast too, and what to expect on the menu when you arrive.
Last couple years, so should be a good time. We'll see what he's got cooking for us.
All right. See you next Sunday, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time.
See ya.
This episode is sponsored again by pinkcoin.com, campridger.net. They sell seasonings. It's really good. We're going to probably put it on the ribs and stuff at Freedom Feast. Do you want to talk about winning 3rd place at your rib contest real quick?
Well, if we want to talk about our personal lives a little bit, you got kind of something big going on too. But yeah, last week we went to the Clay County Fair. They had an impromptu rib contest. So me and our treasurer, Daryl Root, he's the guy behind Camp Ridger and the Dakota Rustler Show. We used his seasonings to make our ribs. We're both I've been grilling for years, but I would still consider myself an amateur. We had a couple basic grills. We placed 3rd out of 7 people, so it may not be that impressive, but for our first barbecue competition, I was pretty pleased with that result. And like I said, you're lucky. Everyone's lucky that I did not get first, because I was never going to let that down. I told the wife that if I won, she was going to have to start calling me the champ from now on. So,
yeah, there's a big corruption going on with the rib judgment committee. It's half Democrat, half Republican. So they're always going to give libertarians 3rd place. Yeah.
They kept us out of the debates. They just the rib debate.
They just let you debate. We would have won that for sure. But I think that's awesome that libertarians are getting out there.
Sean said, "Call me. I can help with meat." So I have to. I know he called me, and I feel bad. I haven't got back to him yet. So, you can't call me right now, dude.
CJ says, "Can't wait for the great food at Freedom Feast this year. I'm going back for seconds." Shit, man. Every year I go back for like 6th or 7th. So you're going to have to pump those numbers up, CJ. We expect more from you, man.
Well, we don't want to bring I know the first year, 7, we actually had more than 7. I think we probably had 15 or so people.
Yeah.
We had people stop in, but they didn't stay all day. And so anyway, I know that first year, everyone who was there went home with like a half rack of ribs at the end of the day. Because I had made a ton of food. So Like,
very impressive.
go to our Facebook page, and if you plan on attending, click that, that you're going. So then we kind of get a little bit better idea how many people to expect, I suppose.
Yeah.
But you
So
had
it's
something
smart
big
to
going
plan
on.
ahead.
You've had something going on.
Yeah, I've got things going on, but I'm gonna wait to talk about those things until it's completely ready.
The
Campfire
Hedgehog
concert.
Watchdog might have a new sponsor coming.
Yeah. Campfire concert at Sundance this DJ. Yeah. Hedgehog Watch is gonna have a new sponsor. Definitely gotta look out for the home team. But anyhow, we'll see you all next week. I'm gonna stop it there. Go back to my outro video here. See ya.
Yeah.